Probably many of you saw the PBS program The Black Church, This Is Our Story, This Is Our Song, just before Easter. Trying to learn as much as possible about our African American brothers and sisters. I found it truly excellent from both historical and theological points of view. As a history teacher in my first life, as well as someone who presented African American history as one of my fields in graduate school, I can say the story was both accurate and compelling, and Henry Louis Gates is a storyteller par excellence. Just as We Shall Rise Again by Jeremy Young has become for many of us at Holy Trinity our song, so the Acts of the Apostles is our story, and not just ours at Holy Trinity, but that of Christians everywhere throughout the ages. And Luke and the others are certainly also storytellers par excellence. And that storytelling has a sacred power. In the words of the Baal Shem Tov, the founder in the late 18th century of Hasidic Judaism, the secret of redemption lies in remembering, which is exactly what sacred storytelling is. We do it every time we celebrate the Eucharist and recall the death of the Lord until he comes. So, Acts, unlike the Gospels, which are more precisely Jesus' story, is our story, the story of the first generation of our Christian family. This passage from Acts is the second summary of how the early Christian community lived. Who are these community of believers? We know that Mary, the mother of Jesus, was with them in the first telling, probably meant by Luke to establish a link between Jesus' birth and the birth of the church. By the time of the second summary, in today's reading, they had become a larger extended family. They had already experienced both Pentecost and persecution. Peter had already begun to heal and to preach as soon as the Spirit was given. It is incomprehensible to think that there were not women there. Just as many people had supported Jesus and his companions throughout his ministry, the community of believers continued to support one another. We suspect that because the gift of Joseph, also known as Barnabas, is commented upon, it was probably voluntary, even for a specific need, and not required. But sharing of material wealth was certainly characteristic of their way of life. Story, history, in Greek gives us also from the same root guidance, seeing, and wisdom. So what can we learn from their way of life? What wisdom can we find in telling their story that it becomes our story? As we are called to imitate Jesus, are we also called to imitate them, the first community of believers? It sounds rather countercultural. Much of our church does not appear to have heard the message. What then is characteristic of their way of life that we might, as a parish, as families, and as church, be called to imitate? At the very least, to try. Clearly, they prayed together. They broke bread together, a clear reference to the Eucharistic meal. They healed, perhaps in a variety of ways. They shared their possessions. They proclaimed the kerygma, that the Jesus who had been crucified is alive and risen, a dangerous proclamation indeed. They told his story. These are obviously some of the things that we can and do together, even now. Perhaps for us it is a question of degree. How much do I pray? To what extent do I share my material possessions? How How am I a healing presence for my family and community? Does my life proclaim that Jesus is risen? Questions to ask ourselves in this special season. In the remembering of the Christian story, do we find redemption? The generation of Acts is a unique generation, and their story is unique. But we can make it our own by remembering it and imitating it. Remembering and imitating are evangelization. Remembering is our sacred story, and telling that sacred story by our lives makes the Holy Spirit visible in and to our world.